Welcome to the How One MSP Fixed Project Management in Their PSA webinar. Today's presenter is Matt Fox. Please note that all lines are in listen-only mode. This means that after joining today's presentation, your line will automatically be muted. We welcome any questions at any time during today's presentation. Please enter your questions into the questions box in your webinar console. At the conclusion of today's event, our speaker will be holding a Q&A session. And with that, let's get started. Matt, take it away.
Well, thanks, Jordan. And I want to say thank you to all who are attending. We're really glad that you're here. Today, we're going to talk about how to take back control of your project work in your MSP using Kanban. So if this is your first time with us, you might not know that actually TopLeft is a unit within a mature MSP. So we know what you're feeling, and we're going to give you a framework to deliver your projects on time, on budget, with less stress with the team you have today. And actually, I have a little bonus this time. If you wait until the end, I'm going to show you a couple of things that we just released literally last night to our customers, some new features we have for projects. They're really exciting. As a little tech check to begin, I want you to find the questions section of the webinar. And if you don't mind, type in your name, your company name, and your location. And I'll read those out. Let's share who's here and where you're from. I always like to hear that. And while you're doing that, I'll introduce myself and TopLeft. So yeah, TopLeft is a unit of Kirchhoff Technologies, or KTI. And we're an MSP in the Vancouver, BC area since 2007. I'm heading up the Kanban division here. Been with KTI and some associated companies since 2010. I've spent the last 10 years involved in Agile project management in a whole variety of contexts, software development, DevOps, sales, marketing and customer success, and so on. So we're going to be teaching what we've learned from a bit of study and a lot of practice here at KTI. So if you see a few of you here, we got Lyndon from Next Digital. Hey, glad to see you here. Going to show you some of those things that you've been waiting for. Alex from Analytics in Kalamazoo. Welcome, Alex. And Zach from the Plug Group. Welcome, and others too. More showing up as we go along. It's very great. Yeah, welcome everybody. So let me tell you a little bit about our story here. This is the KTI crew. Most of us, at least. Obviously, that picture was taken sometime before March, but that is us. A little bit about ourselves. Obviously, as an MSP, we've been doing projects of certain kinds for a long time, but we were not very good at it. We had pretty poor project management practices, to be honest. So we had, like too many tickets that were started and not finished. Like, with 10 technicians at the time, we had 400 or more open tickets. Projects didn't progress. We didn't know what was being close to complete. It was taking a long time to close tickets, and customers felt neglected, and everyone felt siloed. There was very little teamwork. And but this was all despite the fact that we were using a major PSA. We were using ConnectWise, and the tickets had enough data, summary, description, notes, time entries, and so on. But ConnectWise and the projects module was almost no help as far as managing all that kind of work. And we hear the same sorts of complaints from Autotask users. So, we knew of Kanban and some Agile techniques from our software development background. We decided to try it for our MSP projects. And you know what? We found out it works. We made major improvements. And now, even though we're still busy, we feel under control. We understand our own work and our customers are happy. So we're going to teach you the key functions for project management in an MSP, the Kanban way to do key functions that need to happen to deliver these projects successfully. After that, only if you want, I'm going to show you the tools we use and the ones we offer to make it all fast and easy. And then I'll take some questions. Anything about project management or our Kanban tool. So you go ahead and type in your questions in the questions section anytime. We'll get to them at the end. And the webinar is going to be recorded. You can request the recording. Same page, there's a link on that page you use to register, or you can go ahead and subscribe to our blog at topleft.team/blog, and it will be posted there. So yeah, starting out, what is Kanban? Well, it's actually, here's an example of a Kanban board, but it's actually a lot more than just the boards. And this especially in IT, a lot of people have only heard of it recently, but it's actually not a recent thing. It came out of Toyota auto manufacturing in the 1940s. So it's actually, the basic ideas have been around for a long time already. It's a set of ideas having to do with efficiency, reducing waste, and representing work visually. It has been widely adopted in software development, through the early sort of 2000s, and I would say probably most software development teams, if they're not actually using it, everybody has heard of it. And now it's becoming known in many other industries, IT and others. You may have heard of Atlassian and Trello's popular Kanban app. This was a few years ago, sold for big bucks, $425 million. Another one, Asana, project management tool, probably heard of. So just earlier this year, filed to go public. So just examples that, Kanban is growing in popularity, all industries, not just IT stuff. And people are catching on. And we really found it to be very, very useful. So why would you want to use Kanban? Well, one of the things is it makes your work in progress very clear. It allows you to limit the amount of work in progress, which is one of the key things that helps your team be more responsive. You can stop work from falling through the cracks, meaning you keep your attention on the tickets that are have been neglected for a little bit, but only a little bit, not a long time, or that are kind of reaching their budget, maybe going over budget, things like that. You can improve the flow of your work by identifying and addressing the bottlenecks in your team. For example, if you have one engineer who's the expert on a bunch of things, all the work goes to him or her, and so things slow down if it has to go to that person. Well, we want to identify that and see what you can do to fix that. It helps you and your team to stop feeling overwhelmed, because now you can plan better and you can visualize your work, and you can communicate very clearly with your team because everything's visual. You're all looking at the exact same screens and or whiteboard or whatever it is that you're using for Kanban. Also, you can adopt Kanban now with small manageable changes. It's not something you need to go to a big course for and then launch it in your team all at once. You can add it to what you're doing now and then begin to make small changes little by little, so it's not overwhelming for you. So this webinar is for project managers at MSPs. Now, a lot of material about Kanban and Agile methods is very conceptual, or maybe it's geared to software development or operations. You may have found that if you've done some of your own research or reading. There's not a lot for project managers at MSPs, so it can actually leave you kind of feeling like you understand the ideas about Kanban, but you don't know what's the next step to take to use it. So this webinar is about the basic steps to take day by day, week by week, to keep everybody happy, your clients, engineers, sales, your boss, and yourself. So it's for, kind of roughly, say 5 people working on 20 projects, that sort of thing, or even up to 25, a big team, 25 folks working on 100 projects, something like that. It's not a complete methodology. What you've learned about quality and communications, risk management, and so on as a project manager, you're going to keep those things. Obviously, I'm not suggesting you're going to ignore all of those other things, because this isn't the complete thing. It's just how to use Kanban. And it's also probably not appropriate if you got a very, very large project, 20 people working on one project, that sort of thing. You're going to need more structure for that. But that's less common, in an MSP. This is for MSPs. So just quickly, here is the cycle. This is a framework that we use to deliver our projects successfully. First you identify the projects, you're going to break down the work, then you estimate the work, then you assign it to somebody, and then as the engineers do it, you as a project manager, you monitor it, and then you start that cycle over. It's pretty straightforward. We remember that just quickly, the first letters of those, IBEAM, IBEAM, makes it easy to remember what are the parts of that cycle there. So since it's a cycle, we need to talk about, how long is a cycle? There's kind of 2 choices there. You may have heard of Scrum before. It's a Agile methodology that prescribes a lot of specific methods. One thing that they have described is called a sprint. It's just a period of time, and you work in a series of sprints. You decide how long your sprint is. 1 to 2 weeks would be pretty common, and then you divide your work into sprints, and just on and on and on. The reason you might do that is to get more predictability. because the rough idea is that you decide how much work, the team decides how much work they can take to do in the certain sprint, whether that's a week or 2 weeks, and then they don't get bothered, they don't get any changes to that work for that period of 2 weeks, and then they at the end they kind of review, they take off another chunk of work, and so it kind of resets there every 2 weeks. Kanban is a bit different. There's no such thing as a sprint in Kanban. Everybody's just working kind of continually, and if something needs to get bumped to the very top of the roadmap that wasn't there yesterday, that's okay. This is Agile, and so that's totally fine. And you might choose that to get more flexibility if that's more important to you. You work in an environment where there's just a lot of changes. It's not quite as important to plan ahead as much as it is to be able to adjust to changes. So those are your 2 choices as far as your cycle frequency. So the first part of your of the cycle is identifying the projects. So basically, this is anything primarily driven by you, not necessarily by the client. Obviously, the client has the needs, but you're the expert, and you define how this project gets done. That's what the customer wants from you. They're not asking for you for the specific things, different than help desk. So it's going to have multiple tasks, obviously, probably multiple engineers working on it, and certainly, hopefully, you've got a clear scope and schedule agreement with the client. You should also include your internal projects. Anything that the whole project team is working on. So maybe you're upgrading your own RMM solution. That's project work, and if your team is working on it, then it should be included with that, even though it's your own internal project and not a customer thing. Now, how are you going to use a Kanban board? Well, what we would do for this, this step is really simple. What you would do is to go make what you call a swim lane. So it's actually just a horizontal section on, whatever tool you're using. For example, if you're using a whiteboard, you just maybe take some, some of the green or blue tape and make a big mark across the board to make that section, one section for each project, and then label it. And later we're going to put on the specific tasks for that work, and we'll also split it up into columns. But as far as identifying projects, this is all you do when you're using Kanban for this step. Now you're going to break down the work. So this means you're going to make the tickets for all these projects that you identified. So how much of this are you going to do? Well, you're going to focus on just the next major phase or milestone for the work in each project. You're going to plan out the entire milestone at a time, but you're not going to do the whole project necessarily, unless, if the project is just a single phase, because it's a smaller project, then obviously you are going to do that. But if it's a larger project and you consider that it has multiple key sections or milestones, then you're just going to do the next milestone. We're not going to plan all of it because that's not very agile. You might get, through the first phase and then realize that the stuff that you did in the first phase means that the last phase isn't necessary, or maybe you need a lot more than what you previously thought. But because you did that planning work, now that planning work is wasted. And if we just left it until later, you wouldn't have done it, wouldn't have been wasted. So that's why we recommend only doing it for the next phase. But why we do recommend for the next phase, like the entire phase, is because we don't want to miss anything. So that's kind of a key thing. And that's one of the main things that can kind of blow up your projects is missing entire sections of work. So we don't definitely want to avoid that, and so doing it in a whole phase at a time is the best way to do that. Now, who's going to do this? Well, it's going to be somebody familiar with the actual technical issues for whatever the topic of this project is, at a pretty detailed level. So it could be an engineer, it could be you if you're as a project manager, you came out of the engineer background, so you understand what's going on, then it's fine if it's you, but it's got to be somebody who really understands the technology. As a project manager, you don't have to do it. You're just responsible for making sure it gets done. So as far as actually filling out these ticket or task fields in your PSA, what fields are you actually going to use? Well, you're going to use the summary and title, obviously, description and tasks if you want. The due date, that's only if there's a constraint imposed from outside. So you're not going to set the due date as for the purpose of managing the work. It's only going to be if, for example, that particular part of the work needs to be done because there's a regulatory change that this project is for. It comes into effect at a certain date, or maybe there's a conference. The conference starts on a certain date, or the RF is for an RFP and that has a due date. So something like that. That's what you're going to set the due date for. If it's thinking about the priority, there's not, priority as far as your PSA is concerned is definitely more of a help desk sort of thing. For project work, you're going to use the kind of whatever you consider the normal priority. For just about everything, you might use a lower priority for things that are nice to have. You're going to do it at the end of the project if there's any time left over, if that ever happens. Or maybe you might use a higher priority if there's unexpected stuff that's actually come to light later and it's quite urgent, then you can go ahead and use a priority. But when you're just doing the normal planning, you're not going to use the other priorities. And go ahead and set any other fields you'll actually use. We don't want to go and set things like maybe the contact or the type, subtype item, or dependencies between the tickets. You don't need to set those if you're not actually going to use them, because then it's just waste. But if you are going to make use of those, then do certainly go ahead and set those if it's actually going to help you and your team. There's a couple things that you're not going to set is you're not going to set the duration, because that's kind of a push thing. It tells the engineers how long they, what period of time they can work on this in, and that's like pushing the work instead of letting the engineers pull the work, which is more agile, more sort of a Kanban method. So we're not going to do that. Also, we're not going to set the budget, estimate, story points, things like that, because we're going to do that later, and we're not going to assign it to anybody just yet, because that will come later as well. Now, as far as setting the ticket size, now this is really key, because it's the difference between having being able to see tickets flowing through your pipeline fairly regularly versus big ones that just sit there and it's very hard to see progress. So you're going to size the tickets to be basically kind of as cohesive as you can. A unit of work for the customer that has minimal dependencies on other tickets. Now, certainly there are going to be some dependencies, but you're going to try to minimize those. It's not going to depend on much else. So like, for example, say you have a network upgrade project. A ticket for actually like installing the new office router, that would be too big. That's too much work for one ticket. You need to split that up into smaller things. Like, for example, you're going to order that router. Then you're going to configure it, because you do that in your office as an example. And then you're going to have a third ticket for actually going out to do the replacement. So it's that's sort of the size and the level of cohesiveness that you want to aim for there. Now, ideally, it can be done, any ticket can be done by one technician in one sitting. That's sort of the ideal that you're looking for. We know that that's not always practical, but kind of keep that in mind. If you know in advance that it's going to require a handoff, then split it up. Like, for example, the person who configures the router in the office is always different than the person who goes out to set it up. Well, then those should be different tickets. That doesn't include handing off for a review stage, as an example. Like that's fine. That represents the work actually moving through your pipeline. So that's no problem at all. You don't need to split it up for that purpose. If you're in doubt, errs towards too small tickets. As far as all the projects that I've seen MSPs do, very few have tickets that tend to be too small. Most are tending towards too large. You got like 80 hours on a ticket or something. I've seen that a number of times. So if you were in doubt, err on the side of too small. If you find that you're just doing too much busy work moving tickets around, then you can always make them bigger next time. So what we want is to be at the very most 2 days of work. 16 hours or whatever. The only exception there is if it's really, really unprecedented, risky work, research and development of something, and the customer understands that and they've got the budget to match. Then, go ahead and make it more than 2 days of work. But that's usually a minority of the work that we do in MSPs. So you're looking at most 2 days of work. And then, as far as the scope goes, it's really, really important that the description and the scope should be clear in the ticket, so that you as project managers, your engineers, and your customers have the same understanding of when it's done. That's really key. You don't want the engineer to come to you to say that it's done, because they understood that it was done, and then you come back 4 days later and find out that they only did half of what you were intending them to do, because something was unclear. Certainly you don't want that to get to the customer. Also, you don't want the engineers to spend time doing more than you intended to do, because that can be a waste. So this is important to make sure that it's very clear. What we've found works really well is, we found ourselves talking about tickets that were done versus tickets that were done, meaning, a ticket that we'd say it's done, but actually, there's that one last thing, one last documentation, or we got to tell the customer it's done or whatever, so it's not actually totally done. But then we say it's done, when it is actually 100% done and everybody can agree on it. So we actually kind of started talking about having a checklist that says it's done when, and then we just write out, one, obviously at the minimum, kind of 1 point in the ticket, maybe up to 10 items. You can just toss them on the description in the ticket in your PSA, or you can actually use the checklist or to-do item functionality in there. It's up to you. But just be really clear, and when it's in the form of a checklist, really helps to make sure that everybody is on the same page about when it's done. Also, being able to monitor the progress in that ticket, because you can see clearly the difference to when there's six items on the checklist and 3 of them are done. So as far as using Kanban for this, you're going to make like supposing you're using a whiteboard or a wall or something, you're going to make a column here. You're going to call it the backlog. This is all the work that you need to do. You're going to make 1 card for every ticket or task, and then you're going to rank them. So for example, in a CRM implementation ticket, this is your 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th ticket by importance, and that would be ideally what the order that the engineers are going to work on them. And then same thing for this email migration project. So then that brings us to the estimate part of the phase, part of the cycle. So we're gonna enter the budget or estimated hours or story points. I'll get to story points in a moment. Basically for educated decision about prioritizing and assigning work, because you might find that if a ticket has a small budget, but it's actually a valuable thing for the customer to have, even if the project isn't 100% done, then maybe you just want to go ahead and put that first, because it's not very much work. You can knock that out in half a day or whatever, compared to something that could be a full 2 days of work. And being able to see that estimate there will help you put that in the right place in the priority. So about measuring hours versus story points, this deserves a little discussion since we're doing this in Agile and Kanban. So story points, or some people call them complexity points, is something that has to do with Scrum methodology. Basically what it does is you estimate, instead of thinking about the number of hours that a ticket is likely to take, you're going to think about the complexity of the work relative to the other tasks. So, and then you just give it a number. That's the most common way to do it. There are some other ways that other teams do it, but the most common is a number. And you don't even try to get that accurate. A lot of people use Fibonacci sequence, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. So you don't even try to be super precise about it. That's not the point. But you give it some, choose one of those numbers that represents its complexity compared to the other tickets. So use, simple stuff will be 1, 2, or 3. Medium will be, 5 or 8. 13 is getting up there in terms of complexity. And the benefit of that is that it doesn't matter who's going to do the work, in terms of a senior engineer versus a junior engineer. Because certainly when you're thinking about hours, it does matter who's going to do the work, because obviously a senior is going to do it faster than a junior. But as far as complexity goes, that doesn't matter who does it. And so you can, it's good for the team to agree on the number of, makes it easier for the team to agree on, what's the scope of this and what's the measure of complexity for that. Certainly a lot more that you could study on this. You could do some reading on your own, but we'll leave it at that. That's if you want to keep it really simple, then just do hours. If you want to get more sophisticated, then do story points. Basically, like how much of this are you going to estimate? You're going to estimate the tickets that need to be done soon. So, soon for a Scrum would be at least 1 future sprint's worth. You definitely need to have that estimated. If it's Kanban, since you don't have these sprints that happen over and over, you're just kind of working continually. All you need to do is just make sure that you keep the queues from being empty. You don't want the engineers run out of work. So that's your job as the PM to make sure that they keep a queue of work that has been estimated. So again, who does this? Well, it's the team or any individual who could actually do the work. They don't have to be the one who's going to do the work, but they need to be able to do the work. They got to be familiar with the project and the technology. Now you might be asking, why would you separate this from the breakdown stage if it's this, could be the same people doing it? Well, one reason mainly, it delays this work until all the scope changes are probably done. Because for some of the work, by the time you do the estimation work for some tickets, you're probably already completed work for earlier tickets in the project. And then the work on the earlier tickets that you did can inform the estimates that you're making now. Now, something that you can't do if you do the estimation work all at once, all at the beginning. And so you're gonna have more knowledge about your project if you let this wait until the end. Or not until the end, but until this particular stage in the framework. So if you end up with an estimate of, if you're using hours, if it comes out as 2 days or more, then you're going to have to break that ticket down further. So how are you going to use Kanban here? Well, you're going to add a couple of columns here. We are going to have one for needs estimation. So that is where you take these sticky notes off of the backlog when you decide, we need to move this forward and get this estimated so that an engineer can actually do it. So you just pick them up off the backlog, you stick them here, again, still in prioritized order, and then it can wait there until you have time to actually, or whoever is going to do the estimation actually has time to do that. And then when they do the estimation, they just write a number on it, like you see there, and then they move it to the ready column, still in the same order that they appeared here, so you know which is the most important. And that's about it. So that brings us to the next phase of the framework, of the cycle, where you actually assign work. And so this is the trigger that actually makes the work get done. You're basically putting it into a queue where someone will actually work on it. Now, one of the biggest blocks to the smooth flow of work is bottlenecks, where certain work depends on certain team members. So for example, maybe you have only one senior engineer. They need to be consulted on like half of your tickets. That's going to lead to long queues for certain types of work because certain types have to go through that one person. So you want to try to minimize that, because the more uniformly these assignments can be done within your team, the fewer bottlenecks you'll have. Now, ideally, every member is going to have the same familiarity with all of your technology, all your clients, all your projects and whatnot. Now, that's ideal. We know that's not going to happen, but that's what allows you to assign your work in a completely uniform way. Now, to get there, you're going to be looking at things like training and certification, and also improving your documentation. So, because then someone can, without a lot of familiarity about a certain project or a certain technology, they can still get started and do at least the basic work, the common sort of stuff, and maybe you don't have to send as much work to your expert, or if you have one or two experts who are the bottlenecks, then there's more work that can go to someone else. So training and certification and documentation are the ways that you make that better. Now, if you're thinking about which tickets to assign, you're going to think about the approaching task, or milestone or project due dates, and also the importance of this project as a whole relative to all of the other projects that you have going at once. So, for example, if you have a client project and then an internal project, and there's not a strict due date for the internal project, then you may focus on that client project, or probably multiple client projects, at the expense of your internal one, if that's okay. Now, if your internal project does have a strict due date for some reason, then maybe you're going to prioritize the internal one. And there's a lot of things that can go into that sort of consideration, which are the most important projects right now. And that's really up to you, because you're going to know what's most important for your business overall. Now, an advanced technique is to actually not assign the work, but instead just keep it in a single queue. and let the engineers come when they're ready for new work and then pick off the top of the queue. So your main responsibility as a project manager would be to prioritize that queue, make sure it's in the right, those tickets are in the right order, and then let the engineers work from the top of that queue. That's kind of your ideal, but again, that's what requires really uniform, knowledge and certification and documentation in your team. But that can save you a lot of work if you don't have to worry about assigning that. It's also a lot more flexible in terms of, if your expert goes away on vacation for a week or two, that doesn't really impact your business when you just have a single queue. Whereas that will impact you if you have bottlenecks like that. So as far as using Kanban here, now I've kind of just skipped out and oh yeah, so we've kind of shifted the swim lanes here. So now in a new part of your wall or your whiteboard or whatever you might be using, you're gonna now shift over to using a member swim lane. So notice, our swim lanes aren't by project here anymore. Now they're by the member because now we're assigning them. So what you do is you pick the card off of the ready column and you put it into another ready column, but now it's by the swim lane, and then prioritize it in this list here. So Terry knows that this is the list for his work when he's ready to start new things. First this one, second, third, fourth, fifth, same with Nicole. So they all know, it's very clear to them exactly what's coming up when they're ready to do new work. And that brings us to the last part of the cycle where you just monitor things. Now you've done most of your planning and you've set the structure in motion, and now the engineers are going to do their work and you need to monitor it. Just make sure that things keep moving forward. So the engineers are doing their magic. They're taking new work from the ready column when they finish other work. It's not the sort of thing that you just you do the monitoring and then you're done. This is actually what this is the part of the cycle that you're in actually most of the time as you do this cycle, because the other work is things that you can do them and they're done. Monitoring, not so much. You're just kind of continually doing that. Shouldn't take too much work. Shouldn't take too much time though. Certainly we don't want this to be a burden, and we don't actually need to consider all of the tickets as they get done. What we are going to do here is monitor by exception and look for those tickets that aren't moving through the pipelines as fast as they should do. So we're going to manage by exception. So what are the exceptions that we're actually going to look for? Well, we're going to look for any due dates versus the progress that's happening on that ticket. So we certainly want to know if a due date is approaching, and maybe the due date is tomorrow and the ticket hasn't even been started yet. Well, that's going to be a problem. You definitely need to get somebody starting on that ticket there. Maybe you do need to push it to somebody instead of letting them pull it if that sort of thing happens. You're going to be looking at the hours logged on the ticket versus the budget hours. If you're estimating by hours to know if something is really blowing up. You're going to be looking at a long time in any column, where actually long sort of depends on the column, because something that is in say an in progress column, which I'll get to in a minute, that can maybe be there for a day or two, but then you want to see it move on. You don't want to see it in progress for too long. Compare that to something where maybe you have a column for tickets that are waiting. Maybe you're waiting in the mail for the router to come. And if it's waiting there for 10 days, that's not a problem. So you're going to think the length, what you're actually monitoring for, the length of time there depends on what column it's actually in. You're going to look for a long time without a time entry or note, because that can tell you a lot about whether engineers are actually working on a ticket or not, or whether it's just maybe it says it's in progress, but it's actually not getting any work done. You're going to look for bottlenecks. Talked about that already. Anything that's been escalated from the engineer. Maybe it needs some more decisions, or maybe the engineer sees that they've used up all the budget hours and they haven't finished off the ticket. It's probably going to be double what the budget says, and they need to talk to you. So that's the sort of thing that you're going to monitor for. Some of the possible resolutions for those sorts of problems is you're going to reassign the work to a new engineer. If something gets stale, hasn't been touched in a while, maybe it just needs to go, maybe that engineer is too busy, needs to go to a new engineer. Same thing if If you do have a bottleneck, maybe you just need to suspend new assignments for that particular engineer so that he or she gets a chance to work down that large queue of work. Maybe a ticket ended up being too big, and now it could be that you've done, or the engineer has done the most important half of the ticket, but there's still half of the work to do. But maybe you just want to split that up into 2 tickets, and so the most important half is already done. But maybe you make a second ticket that reflects that that other half of the work. It could be that you just need to cancel that work entirely. Maybe you found out that the business case is gone, or you needed some information from the client and it goes to you. It's not responding. So it could be that you just cut that off. Don't plan to do that anymore unless the client gets back to you. So as far as using Kanban here, now we have a whole selection of columns here that kind of reflect how tickets will move from the left to the right side of the board here. This is the engineer's queue of work to do. They're going to pick off from here, probably bring it over to the started column. Some people call that the in progress column, mostly the same thing. So you can tell what they've already started. Ideally from that, they might go to whatever sort of review or QA acceptance sort of procedure you have as it moves towards the completed side of the board there. Of course, it could be that it is going to go to waiting. They do some work. Maybe they place the order for the router, and then it has to go to the waiting stage because we're going to finalize that work once it actually comes. Or it could be that the next stage of the work is something that just needs to be done on a schedule. It's a network outage. We're going to be on site. We told the customer that we're going to be there on Thursday at 8 in the evening. And so there's really not any more work to do on that ticket until Thursday at 8 in the evening. You don't want that clogging up any of these other columns. You don't want that back in the ready column because you've already done the most important work on that. So that usually calls for its own column here for scheduled stuff where, there's nothing to be done on that ticket until we get to that time in the calendar when the work is going to resume. So those are a couple of pretty common columns that we see in project environments. Obviously, the part over here is really going to depend on your practices as far as what sort of review practices you have and whether how long you want to see the tickets here in the completed. Sometimes you just remove those after a while because you don't need to see them forever. So the engineers kind of have control over this. As far as the project management goes, you're going to mark the tickets that have some sort of fault. Maybe with a red sticker you could do, or if there's a serious fault, orange could be sort of a keep a closer eye on this, but it's not yet a fault, that sort of thing. So that's how you can be very clear in your team about what's the state of all this work. Okay, so notice that we don't have any sort of schedule this into the calendar step. Most of the work we don't put into the members' calendars. Now, if it's something where they need to go on site at a certain time of day or coordinate it somehow with a third party, then that work we still do put in the calendar because it does need to be done at a certain time of day. But most of this work we don't need to actually do at a certain time of day. It's just, let the engineers work as fast as they can, take new work when they're done, and that's how we work. So that can allow you to be very effective. That method also allows you to avoid a lot of work because when you put things into calendars, then all of the work depends on each other. If something, something that you thought was going to take 2 hours actually takes 4 hours, then that bumps back all the work that's behind it in the calendar. So it's actually a lot more work for everybody, the engineer and for you. So that's why we avoid that. And actually, we talk a lot more about that in our service webinars. So if you want to know more about how to actually avoid that sort of scheduling, then look at a recording or sign up for one of the service webinars we have coming up, and we'll teach you about that. So that's it. This is project management cycle. Identify projects, break things down, estimate that work, assign it, and then monitor it. Now, as far as the engineers go, I'll just do a quick review. In their swim lane, they're going to work tickets farthest to the right side of the board and then work towards the left. So, if they're looking, if there's something in an acceptance or review, QA, whatever sort of practice you have, if engineers are responsible for doing that sort of QA, then they're gonna focus on that stuff. Whenever there's anything to do, they're gonna review those things, get those moved over to completed. If there's anything started already, then they're going to focus on those things until they either move them towards the right, or maybe they bump back to the left because they're going to be waiting or scheduled or whatever. And only when they have nothing else that's a candidate for actually moving towards the right side of the board, then they're going to go to the ready column and pick off new work. So this is what, this is essentially pull. Basically, like I said, instead of the engineers looking at their calendars to know what to do, they are in control of how much work they take off. That's called pull, and that's what helps maintain low WIP, work in progress, and helps your team remain responsive when we focus on what's already closest to complete. And they're also going to keep all the records up to date, regular stuff that they should be doing already. They're going to be moving those cards, making sure the statuses are correct. They're going to be updating the tickets in the PSA with the notes and time, and they're going to escalate those tickets when needed. They're also going to participate in work breakdown and estimation. You may actually make tickets for them for that, to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to perform the estimate work for certain tickets in this project, and then with that, assign that to an engineer, and then you know that the engineer will do that estimation work for you. Now, there's a few things to be aware of here. You might be saying to yourself that it's a lot of work to manage all this sort of thing when you're already recording this data in your PSA, and you would be right. It can be a lot of work to do this. It does need to be done because the PSAs, ConnectWise and Autotask, are pretty weak at showing you this info in an actionable way. Despite that they have all the data there, they're just not very good at showing it to you in a way that makes it clear like this. When you do some of the management work, it's a lot of clicks in the project modules. There is very little visualization to help you understand what's going on. You can't see multiple projects at once, and they make it very hard to identify the bottlenecks and the neglected work. So we can do a lot better with this. You've already seen how to do that with Kanban, but it's a lot of work to make these Kanban boards when you already have the data. So that's why we built out our own Kanban solution, so that we didn't have to choose between the visualizations or entering data twice. We wanted the best of both worlds, just have software to do it for us. So this kind of gives you the best of everything. You get the Kanban boards for the easy visualization, easy management, just a few clicks to do anything. And you're able to see multiple projects at once, both at the ticket level, and something new is now that you can do it at the project level. You can identify those bottlenecks and the neglected work, and you also don't have to waste your time entering the data into another system, because everything comes straight out of your PSA. And also, anytime you make changes in Kanban, those changes are pushed back to your PSA. So let me show you a little bit about what you can do with this. So this is what you get with the TopLeft Kanban boards. This is just a really basic example, one of the most basic example I could come up with. So we see our columns here: backlog, needs estimation, ready, scheduled, waiting, in progress, completed, and so on. So it makes it really clear to see where everything is at. Each of these cards represents a ticket or a task out of your PSA. Gives you the key data here, the title, the company, project phase. You can see the indicator for who's assigned to that ticket. You can see if it has a budget set. You can see how long it's been in the status and things like that. So really key data here. And you get drag and drop. You can just pick up a card, move it to the next column. You can pick up a card and move it up and down in the column to order that. And it's really flexible. So you can have any number of columns. Like certainly you might customize this a little bit. You don't have to follow exactly what we've laid out here. You can add columns, you can remove columns, you can give them any names that you want. You really don't have to worry about setting up your PSA, the statuses and the boards and queues and so on and so forth. You don't have to worry about getting that set up just right in order to make use of Kanban, because Kanban is the flexible one. It'll be able to deal with however you've set up your PSA data already. So you don't have to make it a huge initiative that'll impact your whole company. You can just launch it out of one team. So here's an example of a project swim lane board. So, this is all done automatically. You just kind of change one setting and it shows it in this way instead of what I was showing you earlier. So it just makes these swim lanes for you automatically. So each swim lane here is one project. So it gives you a really easy way to see at a glance what's going on with this project. We got a bunch of stuff, some stuff that started here. We got something that's ready. We got something that needs a little bit of estimation there. Email migration, we got a few things in the backlog. Some things that are ready and one thing that's been started already, and then financials. This one here, you can obviously see it's got a lot of cards. It's a big project, and so you can see at a glance where everything is. You could also make another board that is focused on a single purpose. So as far as your planning goes, you could just make a Kanban board that has backlog, needs estimation, and ready, and then you use that as the project manager. And then you have another board that has ready, scheduled, waiting, and started, and so on. So you can split it up so that you can really focus on what's the use case for you while you're working as doing certain project manager roles. So we can also shift it over and show it in the engineer swim lane. So here we get one swim lane for each engineer, actually including one at the top where nobody is assigned. So we know that everything in this swim lane is a ticket that's not assigned to anybody. That's okay in backlog, needs estimation, and ready. What's waiting here would be for you to drag to one of these swim lanes to assign it to somebody. So that would be during the assignment part of the cycle. The tickets up here that are waiting started, that would be kind of a concern if they're not assigned to anybody. We would certainly want to see that these swim lanes are empty. And when they're not, that's a bit of a problem that you as a project manager need to fix. So it makes that very visible where that's not nearly so visible in ConnectWise or Autotask. And then we get swim lanes for all of the individuals. Terry here, Joseph, for example, engineers here, very clear. So you can see who's a bottleneck based on, these folks have 3 things started, 2 things started. That's not too bad, but you might find that one of your engineers has 10 things started. And you can see that's definitely a problem. We need to ease up, and we know that the work that's waiting on the person who has 10 tickets in progress, that's going to be delayed. That's going to be a bottleneck. We need to address that. We can see some adaptations here. You can apply certain filters that show you things in a different way. So this is a project swim lane board. We can still see the project swim lanes here, but we've now filtered it. We've applied a filter so that we only see tickets for one engineer. So this is really useful for the engineer to work from. They can see all the projects where they're assigned to any of the tickets here. We can see them in the priorities. We can see any of the things that have a lot of red on them, meaning there's some problems on those, need to get those corrected, and so on. So it's very useful for an engineer to work from. And then we can kind of swap it around actually, and then we can go to back to the engineer swim lane, and we can filter it to show just one project. So this could be useful for you, and maybe it's a larger project. You're having a meeting with your team specifically about this one project because it's a larger project. And now you can go to the member swim lane board and just filter to see just a single project here. And it makes it very easy to see what tickets are not currently assigned to anybody, and then which ones are assigned and what their state is, how far through the workflow they are. It makes it easy to identify the problem tickets, like something that's been in progress for 5 days here. You can see that has been highlighted. Makes it really easy to see that this is a problem compared to one here that's been in progress for only 2 days. We've defined that that's okay. But we are seeing here that this is due in just over a day. So it has this yellow highlighting, orange highlighting here, and it makes it easy to see that there's a bit of a problem. We need to make sure that this is being handled. Engineers can see this too, by the way, and they can even deal with it without any of your involvement, because Kanban is not just intended to be a tool for the project manager. We really see that engineers can benefit from using Kanban boards like this. You can get a lot of benefit from it. And so they'll actually see things like this, and they might even deal with that before you get involved. That's great for you. Now, this is something new that we're really excited about, the project boards. And this is what I was referring to that we just released officially to our customers last night. So one of the biggest features that we've launched in a long time. Really excited about this. So this is now a bit of a shift. It's for companies that have, maybe 10, 15 projects, enough projects on the go that it's really hard for you as a project manager to keep it all in your mind all at once. Because if you have 3, 4, 5 projects, something like that, it's not too bad. But once you get 10, 15 or more projects, it's very difficult to remember everything about what's going on and to communicate about it with your team. So this is different in that these cards don't represent the tickets or tasks anymore. They represent the projects. And the columns are mapped to the different project statuses. So you can see how the projects as a whole are progressing through your workflows, the things that are new, waiting to be done, projects you haven't started at all yet, compared to the projects that are currently in progress, ones that are you're monitoring, meaning you've mostly completed them. They're just kind of waiting to hear back from the customer, see if any changes are needed now that whatever it is you did for them is now in production. And then things that you've completed recently. So this is really, really powerful for being able to keep an eye on your entire portfolio as a whole. Let me show you a couple of interesting things that you can do with this. So this is an example of a swim lane board. So here we're looking at the estimated start date of these projects here, and you can the swim lanes are actually grouping them by week of their estimated start date, and that allows you to see things like to see if you have too many projects starting at any one time, so that you avoid over committing yourself and saying that your team can do things that are really unrealistic, like starting 8 projects in 1 week or something like that. So it allows you to plan, allows you to communicate with your sales team, for example, to say, we know that we can start 2 or 3 projects a week. And so assuming that these projects go according to plan, then hey, here's a salesperson, here's the week that we can start this project if you sell it right now. So that has historically been something that's been pretty hard to figure out using ConnectWise or Autotask, but with Kanban now, this can make this a lot easier. You have some exceptions here that you can see on the project as a whole. So we can see, if you're over budget on the project as a whole, then you can see that. Also, you can put on the same alerts that kind of highlight it for you if you're approaching either the start date or the end date. There's ways you can configure that to highlight this for you so that as a project manager, you need to be focusing on that to make sure you can achieve those dates that you set. One little tip here is that if you click on this icon, then that will actually bring you back to one of the Kanban boards that shows you the tickets or the tasks for that individual project. So that can be a very quick way to say, okay, you know what, I want to kind of focusing in on this project at the moment. Click in there, and now you can see all the details of the individual tasks and tickets within that project. So you can really answer a lot of your questions very quickly here compared to how long it would take to do things like that in ConnectWise or Autotask. Like we're talking about going from 100 clicks down to 2 or 3 clicks to answer a lot of these questions that you need to answer regularly as a project manager. So overall, what is this going to allow you to do? Well, it's going to improve your efficiency. It's going to reduce all the clicks that you're making. Everything's right in front of you. Yeah, you're able to show the project and service work together. That's very useful for a lot of MSPs who don't have dedicated project teams. You got engineers who are working both on help desk and on project stuff because it's a smaller team, and then it's really useful to show that work together. At the moment, that's just for ConnectWise. We do want to add that for Autotask. It avoids miscommunications because everyone sees the same data on the same boards. Everything is completely shared. You're looking at the exact same displays, and so it's very easy to improve communication. You can make it easy to assign and unassign members. You can dispatch to calendars or create service calls in Autotask terms. You can view the time and the notes on a ticket and a task. You can enter new time and notes. So it's very easy to do. So the engineers are actually going to be doing this now because it's easy and it's not a chore. They don't have to click 100 100 times to get to the right ticket and enter some time in those. You can customize the card appearance, meaning this is just for ConnectWise at the moment, but we are going to be adding this for Autotask. So you can change how the cards look, give them a special background color or a border or something like that based on the properties that you define for what's important for you. And then you can manage your sales opportunities. Again, that's another thing that's coming in the future for Autotask. So it's ConnectWise only just now, and activities, which is just a ConnectWise thing, not an Autotask thing, but you can manage those as well. So, obviously at Kirchhoff Tech, we've found this to be very useful, but a lot of other MSPs are really finding this useful as well. So here's an example from Sarah Ellis, a project manager at a company called Clear Guidance in Austin. She says, we turned project management from staring at huge lists, impossible to prioritize, became easily digestible, visually compelling information. She's no longer looking at a mountain of data and wondering how to break it up. It's already broken up for us. Makes the flow of the tickets a lot easier to see. And she noted that in ConnectWise or Autotask, she wasn't able to see the project side by side anymore, but now she can see them together. So it's really led to a lot of improvements there at Clear Guidance, and it can for you as well. And so as far as seeing more and helping you understand how this can help your MSP, we would love to talk with you and show you exactly what it can do and really focus in on what it is that you need in your MSP, because every MSP is very unique. So you can do this here, www.topleft.team/schedule call. That will allow you to get a demo in our calendars. We'd really love to talk to you, show you exactly what it can do. Also, as a way to say thanks for attending this webinar and thanks for moving forward quickly. If you sign up by August 13th, and we want to give you 10% off the first year of the annual plans, which are already discounted off the monthly plans, using the promo code Kanban PM 2020-07. So that's actually 30% off the regular monthly price. That's a big savings. Just a way to say thank you for becoming a member quickly. And we also want to send you a copy of either the Phoenix Project or Making Work Visible books. We recommend these books to everybody. We love them. This Phoenix Project is a bit of a novel about just great practices to use in an IT organization. Making Work Visible is one that really focuses in on specifics of Kanban stuff, and they're really great books for learning and improving your practices in your MSP. So that actually brings us to the end. Now I'm going to take a moment to see what questions we have. Now's the time to enter the questions in the questions section. If you have anything about again, about project management or the Kanban tool specifically, I'd love to answer that for you. So just give me a moment here and I will see what has been submitted. All right, so I see a few from Alex. Easy ones to answer. What's the licensing model? Yeah, great question. So we license it based on basically looking at who's assigned to the work on the ticket. So it's not based on who can log in to Kanban and view the boards. Actually, when you sign up with any number of licenses, your entire team is able to log in and view the boards and use the boards. But what you're going to see on the boards, what everybody is going to see on the boards is the number of either tickets or projects that are assigned to your licensed members. So let's say that you sign up for, let's say that you have in your team maybe 6 engineers who are getting assigned to those tickets. Then you're going to be looking to get 6 licenses. Now, if you only got 5 licenses, for example, you would assign them to 5 people, and then the 6th engineer that you have there, that engineer is welcome to log in and use Kanban, but actually he or she won't see his tickets there because they're not a licensed member. So that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of licenses, is who's getting assigned to those tickets. on the project boards that we just introduced, we're looking at who is the project manager or the lead resource. And so though that person needs to be licensed in order to show those tickets on the board. So that means that typically, executives or or dispatchers, people who don't need to don't typically get assigned to the tickets or lead the projects, they don't need to be licensed, but they're still welcome to use the system. Alex, you had another question there. How long on the market? Well, we've been offering this for about 3.5 years now. Early 2007 is when we really started getting some momentum and offered it to 5 or 6 of our initial customers, and it's just been growing since then. You also asked how long have we supported Autotask? Yeah, that's a more recent addition. So we really launched that sort of end of 2019. So it's about 6 or 7 months in. And yeah, that's when it was launched. And we've kind of got it to a good place a couple of months ago where we considered it fairly close, the Autotask support fairly close to the ConnectWise support that we have always had. Now, there are, as you will have noticed, a couple of things that I mentioned that you can't do in Autotask. So the 2 things that we're still going to build out, going to do this pretty soon in our roadmap, is introducing the card customization for Autotask, where you can set up custom rules that reflect what's important for your organization to focus on, and be able to customize the appearance of those cards. So that's something we're going to introduce for Autotask, because at the moment it's only for ConnectWise, and also the sales opportunities. That's also in the roadmap for Autotask. So those are the 2 big things we're going to be adding there. Someone says, is the video available on YouTube? It will be. If you go, you can get the recording as soon as it's available. If you go to the same page that you used to register for the webinar originally, there's a link there, and you can submit your information to receive a link to the recording. So that would, that's how you can kind of do that self-serve. But I will, when we have it posted to our YouTube channel, then I will email you if you ask about it here. Another question, does it use the project module in Autotask or tickets or both? The answer is both. So on your help desk, it'll be looking at the service ticket side. For your project module, it will be looking at the project task side. So at the moment, this is another thing that we are going to be improving for Autotask at some point. ConnectWise, you can show your project and your service work together. Autotask can't do that just yet, but that is something that we want to address in the future, so that you can have a Kanban board that shows both your service tickets and your project tickets together, because we know that that's useful. Todd asks, will you be adding integration for Synchro MSP? Todd, that's not something that we have in our roadmap right now, but because you asked, I am going to add that to our list, because we do like to keep track of that. Who knows, it could be something that we do in the future. And other folks have asked for Synchro. So I will write that down. Appreciate you mentioning that. But I'm, sad to say we aren't planning that just at the moment. Someone asked, is it integrated with CW Manage and ConnectWise Sell proposal? So the answer is it's not directly integrated with ConnectWise Sell. However, because we do work on the sales opportunities that are in ConnectWise Manage, any way that that's integrated with ConnectWise Sell will be reflected in the Kanban opportunities. But strictly speaking, it would be looking at the opportunities in ConnectWise Manage, not what's in Sell. Now, to be honest, I'm not super familiar with how Manage and Sell integrate with each other, but I do understand that there's some integration there. So unfortunately, I can't I can't speak to the details of that, but anything that ends up as an opportunity in the ConnectWise sales module will show up as a card on the sales boards of Kanban. Okay, so someone asked a couple of questions here about actual project management things. Let me just read those. And so Gerald asked, what about delays caused by past tasks that were not satisfactorily completed? And this became evident as a project moves forward, lack of consideration for dependencies. Okay, yeah, good question. Yeah, so that's going to happen in any project, isn't it? Any project of non-trivial size is going to have some tasks that weren't done quite properly. In a big project, actually ConnectWise at least has a way to actually track that. They have a section called project issues, which are a little bit like service tickets, but they're actually for tracking deficiencies in the project. And Kanban can display those as well, although they're more rarely used in MSPs. So yeah, that's a fact of life. Not all tasks are going to be completed 100%. What I would do for that usually is I tend not to, I guess there's two things that you could do. One is you could go back and see which task was not done correctly, and you could reopen that ticket with some instructions on what's the fault and what needs to be done to correct that. I don't actually like that unless something has been closed for a couple of hours or half a day or something like that, a very limited period of time. Then I would not reopen that. So the other option, what you can do is you can just make a new ticket to correct that issue, and that becomes part of the new scope of the project. And this is what we actually do for our our development of the Kanban product. We have obviously we have our own list of tasks for our development, specific things, which are usually very, pretty small. We definitely try to stick to the 2 days or less rule. But it's a fact of life. Sometimes there's going to be bugs. And so when we identify those, we don't go and reopen that old ticket that was kind of the root cause of the bug. We just go and we make a new ticket, and that just gets put into the backlog, kind of like any new issue. Certainly bugs we tend to treat more seriously, like they are more urgent. But there are some bugs that are sometimes they're just things that we notice because we use the software all day and we don't think a customer is probably going to notice them. So that might be a lower priority one, and it would go lower in the roadmap. But if it's a more serious thing, then certainly that just it gets a new issue. It gets bumped to the top of the roadmap, and it is going to delay the things that are after it. But that's inevitable. And what Kanban does is it lets you visualize that and prioritize that very easily in an appropriate place in the roadmap. So that's one of the benefits of Agile, is that it just kind of accepts that work is not always going to be done 100%, and gives you the tools to handle that elegantly in part of your in your practice. And then there was another question here. Please comment further on maintaining the picture in multiple month-year projects and cohesive individual minimal dependence tickets. This is where I see Kanban fall apart, work with no progress. Well, this is where I think Kanban has a good advantage, because if you stick to the roughly the 2-day rule and have smaller tickets, then actually, yeah, maybe this is kind of focusing in on one of the parts that I didn't really focus on. In this webinar, we don't focus quite so much on the work in progress limits. And so I wonder if that's kind of what this question is focused on. So yeah, it's true that even if you do everything that we wrote, you keep your small tickets, you keep them estimated at the right time, you assign them to people at the right time, it is possible that if engineers are in the habit of starting a lot of work, then that slows down everything. Because one of the comments in this question was, this is where I see Kanban fall apart, work with no progress. And this is actually, like I kind of introduced at the very beginning, this was one of our problems in our MSP, which caused us to look into Agile, was that engineers would have a tendency to start a lot of tickets without finishing them. And that can come from a few ways. Sometimes it's almost built into the practice. If you have, a dispatcher who actually schedules out a technician's day, all 8 hours of the day with certain tickets at certain times of the day, then it's kind of inevitable that an engineer has started a lot of tickets, but they haven't been able to finish them. So it could be that they've, if they were to choose any ticket to work on, there's probably of the ones that they've already started, they could have 10 to 20 tickets. And that is what makes the overall progress grind to a halt. Because let's compare two situations here. One is where an engineer has been in the practice for whatever reason. Like I said, there's a few reasons that can lead to this, but of all the tickets that they have a choice to do, the things that aren't waiting on somebody else, basically, and that they've already started on, meaning they've logged at least 1 minute of work on this ticket, everything that they've already started. If an engineer has 10 or 20 of these tickets, then that's a lot of customer tickets that have been started that are not getting delivered to the customer. And that is what that's what impacts the progress and really slows things down. So what Kanban emphasizes, and as I mentioned, it's not something that we emphasize quite so much on this webinar. We do that more on the service webinars. So certainly if you want to learn more about that, look at the recording or attend one of the service webinars. But Kanban calls for limiting your work in progress. So what we recommend is that if you instead of allowing yourself to work on any one of 10 to 20 tickets or even more, focus on closing those off. You don't start some new tickets until you can get that down to a reasonable level. Ideally, that's only one, because that's really what an engineer can do, is work on one ticket at a time. In real life, that's maybe not so realistic. We can certainly, you might find that engineers need to be working on 2 or 3 things at once, or at least have them started at once. You're probably still not working on them all at the same time. But in the real life, that can happen. But certainly 2 or 3 is a lot more manageable than 10 to 20. And so if someone is only working on or has started 2 or 3 things, then the engineers are going to be finishing things much more regularly. And that's what keeps the appearance of progress. Because a project manager will know that if she puts something at the top of an engineer's queue, the ready queue for a certain engineer, if the engineer is only working on 1 or 2 or 3 things, then it's not going to be too long before that engineer finishes one of those things and then can start something new. So something that's at the top of that queue is going to get taken before too long. It's not going to be too long, and the engineer is going to take that. And then, because the engineer is only working on 1 or 2 or maybe 3 things, that ticket is going to be finished sooner. And so that's what keeps the appearance of progress and things moving forward, compared to if the engineer is working on 10 or 20 things. In that case, if something ends up, the project manager puts something at the top of the engineer's queue, the engineer may take that ticket, may start it, but who knows when it's going to be finished. It could be 3 weeks before that ticket is finished. And that's one thing that really stalls the appearance of progress, and that Kanban and Agile techniques advise against. So there's another question. Some of our people are already Kanban fans using Todoist or Trello on iPhones or smartwatches. By the way, I use Trello on my phone and desktop regularly to just manage my own stuff. I'm a big Trello fan. Does TopLeft perhaps link to those third-party variants with smart device APIs? Interesting question. No, we don't link into any third-party tools other than ConnectWise and Autotask. That's what we're focusing on right now for MSPs. And as far as smart device APIs go, no, we haven't really focused on any of that. We found that there hasn't been a lot of demand for that. People tend to, you know, in the MSP world, most people are sitting down at their desktops. And so this is just what we've been focusing on, is the web app, certainly not watches and things like that. However, we have had some demand for good mobile access. We know that, you know, in an MSP, you are on the road sometimes, and so there's value in having a good mobile experience. And so we have worked on that. And as far as your phones go, we do intend that the Kanban, we don't have a native app for phones, but we have done work to make sure that the web app itself is fairly usable on your mobile device, tablet, or phones. So we think that that's still a pretty good option there. So I'm gonna ask for plans for Teams coordination. Yeah, good question. So this is kind of going beyond Kanban specific stuff, but you may know that in the past we actually did offer a tool for integrating between ConnectWise and Slack. Oh, Teams Planner. Okay, well, I'll continue with the Slack message. So this was actually not really done strictly as part of TopLeft, but it was done with the Kirchhoff Technologies MSP. So we're not we kind of mothballed that. The integration between ConnectWise and Slack. Who knows though? That's kind of in the back burner. It could be something that we could resurrect at some point. If we ever did that, then we would certainly. I think we had gotten a lot of requests for Teams support with that. So I would expect that we would resurrect that with Slack and Teams support. Now thinking in terms of Teams Planner, so we actually do have a lot of people come to us who have been using Microsoft Planner, which, you know, very roughly speaking, for those who don't know, it's kind of like Trello. I mean, hopefully you know what Trello is, basically just basic Kanban stuff. And Microsoft Planner is, Planner is kind of Microsoft's answer to Trello. So we do have lots of people coming and mentioning that they're already using that, you know, because a lot of MSPs have the Outlook 365 subscription, so it's available to them, and have been uncomfortable with the project management modules in ConnectWise and Autotask for all the reasons that I've mentioned already. So we have, you know, seen that. However, at the moment, we're not really planning any integration into either Trello or Planner. And the reason is that we're just focusing on our own app because the integration can be so much richer with our own interface without having to worry about what Planner or Trello are doing. For example, with our Kanban boards, you know, obviously we take the data out of ConnectWise or Autotask, but we can display it any way we want when we don't have to worry about what Planner or Trello are doing. So we, you see this in an example where we are able to display the project name on the card, the project phase. We can say when was the last time entry and when was the last note added on that. What are the budget hours? We can make them highlight those bits of information when there's an exception of some sort, or when the due date is approaching, and things like that. Also, we have the integration in terms of being able to change your data. So things like assigning and unassigning members is not, that would not be possible just in Planner and Trello. Entering time and entering notes and things like that would not be possible with those applications. So we think that's why we have gone ahead and made our own Kanban application, is because the integration is so rich between what we can do with our own application and what ConnectWise and Autotask offers. Okay, so that seems to be all the questions for now. Just let's go back here, just review. So to get a demo, I'll talk about exactly how Kanban can help your MSP and get all your questions answered. Go here, topleft.team/schedule call. Again, we have the promo until August 13th, where you can get 10% off on annual plans and a book of your choice. Yeah, that about wraps it up. Thank you for everyone who attended. Really appreciate it, and I hope to talk to you soon. Over to you, Jordan.
Thank you, Matt. Excellent presentation. To everyone, thank you for attending today's webinar. For those of you whose questions were not addressed, a member of the team will be reaching out to you personally. Thank you and have a great day. That does conclude today's webinar presentation.